Tired of everyone telling you to find your passion, but no one telling you how? Welcome to the Korean Connection, and I'm your host, Korean, an attorney with a passion for empowering others to use their many talents and skills towards a path of self-discovery and alignment. Join me as I share my personal stories, professional insights, and practical tips, and how you can connect the dots between what you're great at and turning your passions into purpose. Let's connect. Push it to the left, make it go no more. Make it like no, I'm coming back home. I'm trying to roll all of my you. I'ma be the greatest, write my name in the stone. Write my name in the stone. Yeah, I'm coming back home. Yeah, I'm coming back home. Write my name in the stone. Cause I'm coming back home. Cause I'm coming back home. Hi guys, and welcome to the Korean Connection. As promised, today we're going to be covering the Diddy trial. It's been 4 weeks of testimony so far, and so I'm going to give you a wrap-up of the first 2 weeks and then what happened in the last 2 weeks of testimony. Within the first 2 weeks of testimony, the prosecution called 16 witnesses in the federal sex trafficking racketeering case against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, attempting to prove that the rap mogul used violence and threats to coerce women into sex and to protect his empire. The jury heard from 5 witnesses who testified that they saw Combs be violent towards Ventura. 2 of the employees allegedly helped him to commit these crimes. They offer corroboration to many of the incidents that Cassie Ventura described during her 4-day testimony. 2 escorts were also called to testify and said that they were paid by Combs to have sex with Cassie, and also testified to the violence they witnessed against Ventura by Puffy himself when she refused to participate. 2 federal agents who conducted searches of Combs' property offered corroboration detailing the items that were recovered during the raid of Combs' property. These witnesses painted a disturbing portrait for the jurors of control, violence, and coercion, all of which the prosecution must link directly to the action of the mogul himself. The prosecution kicked things off with the testimony from hotel security guard Israel Flores, who witnessed Diddy allegedly assaulting his longtime partner Cassie Ventura in a Los Angeles hotel in 2016. The surveillance video that we all had a chance to see and process for ourselves was played in court, showing Ventura being thrown to the ground, dragged, and kicked violently multiple times. Flores testified how Combs tried to bribe him to keep the video quiet. From there came male escort Danielle Phillips, who described the sex parties that were orchestrated by Combs, where he witnessed violent outbursts, including Ventura being dragged by her hair. We also heard from Cassie Ventura herself. Over 4 years, she gave detailed testimony, a decade of alleged abuse that was not only physical, but was sexual and mental. She spoke about the sex party she was coerced into, and if she refused, would result in threats and even beatings. She recalled being followed around by his staff, even her whereabouts being a means of control, subliminally letting her know he has eyes on her everywhere. She testified how he ultimately broke her. Ventura, who was subpoenaed to testify, when asked about her motives to testify, she said she was finally doing what's right. Defense attorneys, through cross-examination, tried to paint Cassie as a jealous ex and a consensual participant in the freak-offs that's just motivated by money. One thing for sure, Cassie Ventura's testimony definitely set the tone for the kind of case that the prosecution plans to bring. And anticipating and understanding the defense in this case, the prosecution knows that corroboration is key. Witnesses after witnesses called by the prosecution added to the chilling narrative of violence used as a means of control against Ventura. We heard from makeup artist Myla Morales, who described injuries she witnessed that were suffered by Ventura after an alleged beating at a hotel at the hands of Puff Daddy. She testified on one occasion to Puff Daddy yelling, "Where the F is she?" and heard Ventura screaming through closed doors. She testified seeing Ventura thereafter with a swollen eye, bruised lips, and knots to her head after Combs left the room. Morales testified that she stayed with Ventura for a few days after that incident and had a doctor friend looked at Ventura to ascertain whether or not she had suffered a concussion. She explained that the friend urged Ventura to seek medical attention by going to the ER, but Ventura simply refused. We also heard from singer Dawn Richard, who testified that she personally witnessed Combs assault Ventura on multiple occasions. She also detailed an incident where Combs took a skillet with eggs and tried to hit Ventura over her head for simply taking too long with his eggs. She also talks about Puff Daddy punching Ventura in her stomach right before an industry event and giving Ventura a black eye. She detailed how she wore sunglasses with Cassie in solidarity that night and to hide the bruises on her face. She was shown a photo of the two in court that she identified as a photo that she wore in solidarity with Cassie that day, and that was shown to the jury. We also heard from Kerry Morgan, Ventura's former best friend. Morgan testified about personally witnessing violent abuse of Ventura by the hands of Puffy, and on one occasion in 2016, she saw Combs dragging Ventura by her hair when vacationing in Jamaica. She detailed that even though the police was called for that incident, Ventura refused to cooperate with the police. She told jurors that her relationship with Ventura ended in 2018 after Combs tried to choke her and hit her with a wooden hanger after Combs demanded to know who Ventura was cheating on him with. She testified that she later accepted $30,000 from Combs as hush money to stay quiet. We also heard from Ventura's own mother, who testified how she took out a loan to pay Combs $20,000 after he allegedly threatened to release a sex tape of her daughter. We heard from some of the employees who were in the inner circle of the entertainment company's empire. We heard from Combs' two former assistants who gave damning insight into the enterprise. David James, Combs' former personal assistant, described during his testimony that during his hiring at Bad Boys, it was explained to him at the onset that this is just Mr. Combs' kingdom and we are all here to serve in it. His job at Bad Boy included stocking hotel rooms for the freak off, buying drugs, and being armed with guns, and explained how he was involved with confronting rival recording executive Suge Knight. He testified he left the job out of fear for his own life. We also heard from former personal assistant George Kaplan, who testified that under immunity, that he finally quit the job after he got tired of cleaning up after the mogul's repeated acts of violence. He corroborated details about the freak-offs, his cleanups, and witnessing abuse on Ventura. We also heard from male escort like Sheree Hayes, a paid prostitute, who described surreal, sexually charged scenes on at least 12 occasions of receiving $1,200 to $2,000 each time for having sex with Ventura. He described the freak-offs as involving oil, veils, and strict rules at the direction of Combs himself. He testified that Ventura flinched during some of Combs' directives, but for the most part, he described her as comfortable, obviously undercutting the government's case of coercion and force. We heard from rapper Kid Cudi, who testified to the threats of violence by Combs. He detailed how Combs once broke into his home and may have firebombed his car in retaliation for dating Ventura. The jury was also shown images of the charred vehicle as proof. We also heard from hotel staff who described Combs' stays as requiring deep cleaning due to the candle wax and the excessive oils. The prosecution called a psychologist and expert to explain the cycle of abuse in an attempt to educate the jury of the cycle of domestic violence and to explain how abusers use a method of power and control to control victims and to explain why it's not so easy for victims to leave. Across 16 witnesses, a picture has emerged, one of a powerful man allegedly using fear, wealth, and influence to dominate others behind closed doors. Through these witnesses, the prosecution sought to corroborate Ventura's claim of coercion and violence used by Combs to keep her compliant and to keep her performing these unwanted sex acts, the freak-offs. These witnesses also provided corroborative testimony that drugs and prostitutes were being trafficked across state lines to fuel these freak-offs, and to establish a pattern and use of threats, violence, and money to keep victims and onlookers quiet and to keep his empire intact. But the defense, on the other hand, who has yet to call any witnesses, through cross-examination, attempts to paint a picture that this is simply a story of jealousy, money, and exploitation of a mogul's private sexual preferences. Those first 2 weeks of testimony was raw, emotional, and disturbing, but it wasn't over. The last 2 weeks of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking trial took a darker, more personal turn as new witnesses exposed even more about the alleged inner world of abuse, cover-ups, and control. From hush money to claims of rape and a second ex-girlfriend's chilling breakdown on the stand, here's what unfolded in the last 2 weeks of the trial. The trial started with a tape and a $100,000 cover-up. Eddie Garcia, a former LA hotel security guard, told jurors that Combs personally sought him out in 2016, calling him Eddie my angel, after surveillance video captured Combs dragging and kicking Cassie Ventura. He testified that Combs called the footage career-ending and paid $100,000 in cash to ensure the video would disappear. Garcia described signing an NDA while Combs loaded a money counter with stacks of cash. The video was shown again to the juror, solidifying a key piece of visual evidence and giving the jurors yet another opportunity to come to grips with that disturbing video. This is important because the prosecution want the jury to be reminded of the animal that is behind closed doors and not sitting reserved in front of them in the courtroom. This week, we saw tension rise in the courtroom, but this time from the judge. Combs was reprimanded by the judge after allegedly nodding at jurors during testimony, behavior described by the prosecution as a form of non-verbal witness tampering. The judge warned that if this continued, Combs could be removed from the courtroom. We also heard from a former personal assistant testifying under the name Mia, who told the courtroom that Combs sexually assaulted her multiple times over the 8 years she worked for him. She claimed the abuse began at her 40th birthday party where Combs forcibly kissed and groped her and ultimately raped her months later at his Los Angeles home in his guest room. On cross-examination, the defense sought to paint her as a Me Too money-grabbing opportunist. Then came Brianna Bana Bongolin, a graphic designer and a friend of Cassie, who alleged that Combs once dangled her over a balcony and threw her into furniture. The defense scored a rare win with her by using the photo metadata that was shown to the jury to show that Combs was not present when this alleged incident took place, but he was in fact on tour. Bongalang struggled to explain the timing, but insisted that even though she was unclear as to the timing, the assault in fact did take place. Next, we heard from a second ex-girlfriend testifying under the name Jane that brought even more devastating testimony. Through tears, Jane described what she called hotel nights, encounters nearly identical to Ventura's freak-offs. For 3 years, she said that she had sex with male escorts at Combs' request, often while he watched, directed, and pleasured himself. She said she did it not because she wanted to, but because she wanted to please Combs and to keep their relationship alive, especially after he started paying her rent and came out that he's still paying her rent to this day. The defense argued it was consensual, even citing jealous text messages. But Jane's breakdown on the stand told a different story, and her testimony is set to continue next week. As week 4 came to a close, the jury and the world has now heard from 2 former girlfriends, 3 former employees, hotel staff, and multiple experts. But the question still remains, will it be enough to convict one of the most powerful men in entertainment? Next week's Jane's testimony continues, and more surprises are expected in what is shaping up to be one of the most significant celebrity trials of our time. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the witnesses? So here's my take. Like the jurors, I'm going to keep an open mind and listen to the end of the prosecution's case and not to be hasty with a decision as to whether or not this is going to be a conviction or an acquittal. However, in terms of how the prosecution is building their case so far, I think the prosecution is doing an excellent job. They are strategic. They're building the case slowly. They are very intentional in terms of how they're trying to prove coercion. We've heard testimony from Cassie Ventura herself that spans a wide range of time period of personal encounters with Diddy, and who obviously was present enough to see a lot of what he's charged with, right? We're talking about the freak-offs. The freak-offs themselves aren't necessarily what's illegal. What's illegal is the transportation of escorts who are prostitutes across state line in order to fuel those freak-offs. It is the use of drugs and importing drugs from different states that some of these witnesses have testified about, being asked by Sean Diddy Combs to bring drugs across state lines or to fly with drugs in their car, to fly with drugs in their luggages in order to participate in these freak-offs or to plan for these freak-offs. We've heard about violence used against Cassie when she was unwilling to participate in these freak-offs. We've had numerous witnesses corroborate about the violence that was used against her, that goes beyond just the best domestic violence, but violence because she refused to act or participate in these sexual activities. So that was very important for the government to prove. We also had corroboration by the prosecution about threats of violence and violence that were used by Sean Puffy Combs outside of his intimate relationship with Ventura. We heard about her about Kid Cudi and how threats of violence were used to break into his home, to set his car on fire. We heard from the personal assistant who threats of violence was used against her when Puffy wanted to know who Ventura was dating. We heard testimony about Ventura refusing to call police even when, or cooperating with police when police was called, which I think is also important to kind of give the narrative about just a cycle of abuse of domestic violence and to explain, why Ventura stayed in the relationship for that long. And that was also explained by the expert herself. The prosecution did a really good job of corroborating a lot of the charge in terms of the trafficking, of the sex trafficking and the prostitution. They did an excellent job of talking about the drug-fueled sex parties. Of course, the defense, while they don't have to put on a case at all, right? The defense job is just to listen to the evidence. And if they choose to put on a case, they can in the end. This burden of proving this case belongs solely with the prosecution. But even through cross-examination, I also believe the defense has been very strategic in punching holes in the credibility of the witnesses. Being able to recall dates and timeline is where the defense is hanging its hats on, right? To show that the memory of these witnesses can't be trusted. Being drugged up, obviously, not only goes towards a prosecution case of, Diddy using drugs to gain compliance from his victims, but it also kind of, for the defense shows that these victims aren't able to remember much of anything, right? Because they were so drugged up that they weren't able to recall these incidents, and they were consensual. They took these drugs not by force. A lot of them testified about voluntarily taking these drugs as a means of coping, right? And so the expert that the prosecution called to kind of detail this cycle of abuse and power and control, it's important it was important to not only show that this cycle of abuse doesn't necessarily only apply in intimate relationship, right? It applies in relationships with friends, with coworkers, who were all very intimidated and fearful for their own life and safety in performing these tasks. Combs' own personal assistants who worked for him for several years also detailed leaving the job, right, because of fear of their own safety and life, having witnessed some of the violence that were done to other people. So it's very interesting how the case is shaping up so far. But in terms of context, for you guys, I want you guys to understand that testifying at trial is not an easy feat, right? Being called and being subpoenaed to testify, especially in a federal trial, especially a case of this magnitude, it's not an easy thing to do. And these witnesses are testifying for a very long time, days on end. Ventura was on the stand for 4 days, all day. And pregnant at that, right? And so you have to take that into consideration when you are, as a former prosecutor, having called witnesses, questioned witnesses on direct examination, and being called as a witness myself and having to testify, I can tell you that it's a nerve-wracking process. And anyone in those situations is gonna be nervous. It's gonna be hard to recall very detailed facts and dates, especially when you're in a situation of abuse that's been happening repeatedly. Those aren't necessarily things, unless you have them written down, are things that you're going to remember so well. But that's where the defense lives. Like the defense, they live in the details. And showing the jury a witness's inability to recall details, then you have an opportunity to question the credibility of all the other things that they claim they can remember, right? So that is one of the games that the defense attorney, they play when it comes to detailed events where details matter, like dates matter. One of the things that the judge could have done in this case, that I'm sure was contemplated in this case, is to sequester the jurors. And to sequester the jurors mean that during the length of the trial, however long this trial is going to take, I think they estimate up to 8 weeks of testimony, or maybe up to 3 months. There's a possibility that the judge could have sequestered this jury and kept them, locked away and hidden from the world, right? Or away from social media. During this time, even though the jury is under strict orders not to engage with the media, not to listen to any news clips or recordings, imagine how difficult that is. If you open up your phone, the first thing that pops up is going to be talking about the Diddy trial. So just understand from a juror's perspective how hard it is for them not to be tainted by just outside information of family members wanting to know what's going on with the case, and they're, by court order, unable to discuss any of the testimony that they learn or to be swayed by any outside information that they hear. Just remember also that some of these witnesses are testifying under pseudonyms. You can't look them up. Some of these witnesses are testifying as cooperative informants to avoid prosecution themselves. For instance, some of Diddy's employees who are testifying, the former assistants, they're testifying under immunity, so they don't get charged, right? So there's so many things that's going on during the course of the trial that lay people perhaps wouldn't know that definitely plays a role in the outcome of this case. One of the most important things that happened during the course of this week's trial is the admonition that was given by the court to Puff Daddy himself or his legal team. He was urged not to look at the jury, not to nod not to affirm any of the testimony or disaffirm any of the testimony that he's heard. Essentially, a defendant is given an opportunity to testify at his own trial. He doesn't have to, but it's a choice he has. And during that time, he can tell the jurors in his own words, what happened or to deny the allegations against him. By affirming or disaffirming and nodding and looking at the jury, you're in essence testifying to the jury. You're telling the jurors, yes, that is true, or no, that's not true. And that's why it is disruptive, right? It's sort of him testifying without having to take the stand. And that could be prejudicial to the prosecution's case. And so he was giving this admonition by the judge. And the admonition is that if he continues to do it, he would be removed from the courtroom and would not be able to sit and to be able to confront the witnesses in his own case, to sit and hear the case against him. And, obviously, this is something that will be detrimental to the defense, right? It's important for the jurors to be able to humanize him, to be able to see him sitting there. Of course, they're going to be looking to him for some sort of reaction, but looking direct. And, just to be clear, in ruling that he can't be reactive, he can be reactive to the testimony while he's looking at the person giving the testimony, right? There's no expectation that he's going to be a robot and he can't react at all. However, directly looking at the jurors in a RICO case of this magnitude that involves force and coercion and violence and intimidation, of course, looking directly at the jurors could feel that sense of intimidation. They could feel, even if it's not intimidation, but they could feel as though he's testifying directly to them, right? And so the judge admonished him not to do it again. In my own personal experience, this is not something that's so uncommon. Judges do give defendants that admonition. I rarely see where it happens. Generally speaking, the defense attorney or the defense team do, tell their client to not be to be compliant with the judge's order, to not be ejected from court, because obviously that'll be detrimental to the case. But also understand that could also be strategic for the defense as well. But going back to my point, this is not something that's so novel. Defendants do sometimes get ejected from trials if they are doing disruptive things. And it's not uncommon for defendants to try to sway the jurors by, looking at them and nodding. And this is a common objection that's made by the prosecution that I've made several times on trial. If I see something like that, that is definitely an objection that I'm going to be making to the court. And rightfully so, the prosecution in this case made the similar objection. Just so you kind of know, this could also be a game that the defense is playing in terms of if Puffy were to be ejected from the trial, just imagine how that would be an immediate appeal, right, for the defense, just to be able to say that in a case of this magnitude, to eject the defendant from his own trial could not have guaranteed him a fair trial. And so, on appeal, he could make that, if he was successful on appeal, a retrial can be ordered. So that could also be a strategy for the defense as well. It gives them an opportunity to hear the prosecution's case. If a mistrial is ordered, they get an opportunity to hear the prosecution's cases in its entirety, have a full transcript of record of trial testimony from those witnesses, that they can then go back and impeach them on a second trial that may happen a year or two later if the prosecution decide to retry the case and then impeach the witnesses on those testimony of the prior testimony. So, a lot of games that the defense can play just by virtue of sitting there and hearing the prosecution's case without having to say a word. So I'm looking forward to see what the next couple of weeks bring, and I'm happy to bring the story live to you on the Korean Connection. So join us next time. Let's connect. Thank you guys for connecting with me today. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to my channel, The Korean Connection. To connect with me, you can email me at thekoreanconnection@gmail.com. And don't forget that sometimes your passion whispers before it roars. And if you're listening closely, the next episode might be where it gets louder. Let's connect. Push it to the